Okay, this is section 2 of chapter 14, War in the East. Your objectives for this chapter are to list the major battles in the East from First Manassas through Gettysburg and their outcomes, and discuss the Christian character of Stonewall Jackson, which is something we will not specifically do in this lecture, but in class. There's a whole sidebar in your textbook that you could take a look at about Stonewall Jackson. Okay, so during the spring of 1861, most people believe the war is going to be over very quickly. They think this is on both sides. The North thinks they're going to be able to beat the South really quickly. They're not going to be able to fight them. And the South thinks that they're going to just whoop the North and it'll be over really, really fast. And they know that this probably will end somewhere between Washington, D.C., the Union's capital, and Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, which is moved because it was originally in Montgomery, Alabama, but now it's in Richmond. And if you know anything about geography, which I hope you do, you will realize that Washington, D.C. and Richmond are very, very close to one another. So Lincoln's initial call-up for volunteers, these men were only enlisted for 3 months. And that's evidence of how people thought that this was going to be over within a very short time period, instead of years. Okay, so the first battle that we want to look at is First Manassas, or it's also known as First Bull Run. The reason why it's known as first is because there will be a second battle near the same location. And this is near a railroad junction. And so you have to know that railroads are obviously something that armies would want strategically so that they can move men and supplies, or the opposing army would want to destroy to keep their enemy from moving their soldiers and their supplies. So this battle takes place in July of 1861. General McDowell, he's a Union general, and I've highlighted him in blue to help you guys know the difference between Union generals and Confederate generals. He's ordered south to take Richmond because we need to have some kind of action happening. These 3-month enlistments are almost up. He meets up with General Beauregard, who is the Confederate general, near this railroad intersection, which is only 25 miles south of Washington, D.C. And this will be the battle where Stonewall Jackson earns his nickname as being the Stonewall, that him and his men come around and he pretty much stands there like a stone wall and no one can move past them. The South wins this battle, but they're too disorganized following the victory to, go after the Northern troops and kind of annihilate them there. What's interesting about this battle is that people came out from Washington, D.C. with like picnic baskets to watch it. They thought that this would be like entertainment. And even some of the people that came to watch the battle, some of like the congressmen and not older men, but men that were present, actually ended up fighting in the battle. And people, fled the scene of the battle when things started to get really heated up, and they realized that this wasn't going to be picnic type entertainment. So the results of this, because you have people that are there witnessing the battle, and some of these people are congressmen, they end up voting for 500,000 soldiers now with 3-year enlistments. They realize after the Battle of First Manassas that this is not going to be over quickly. And President Lincoln will replace McDowell. He sees that McDowell had this failure. We can't have a general like McDowell. He'll replace him with McClellan. And again, I'm highlighting them in blue so you can keep track, especially with the generals that Lincoln fires, because he gets rid of a lot of generals. They're replaced quite frequently. Okay, so now we get to the Peninsular Campaign. In March to July of 1862, it's during this time that you'll see the Battle of the Monitor and the Merrimack. And this is a very famous battle, the Battle of the Ironclad Ships. Now you have iron ships that are covered in iron so that cannon fire won't damage the ships as easily. I have a picture on the next slide that you can see of what these ships would have looked like. One almost looks like a submarine. And pretty much this battle ends up a draw. Nobody really wins. Then you have the Valley Campaign, which is considered one of the most brilliant campaigns of the war. McClellan actually makes it pretty close to Richmond. But Lee is called in as a replacement to another Confederate general, General Johnston. and Lee is able to push McClellan back in the 7 days battle. So McClellan isn't able to make it to Richmond to capture the Confederate capital. So it's a very good job done on Lee's part. Shows what an outstanding military leader he was. Okay, so here's the picture of the Monitor and the Merrimack. And it's not obviously an actual picture. Someone made a little model, but it was most clear to see what these ships look like here in this model than it was in an actual photograph. Okay, moving on to Second Manassas. So August of 1862, we're back at the same place. Lee is going to send his cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart, to raid General Pope. And he kind of sends Stonewall Jackson, on this crazy march where he has to move his troops 62 miles in 48 hours in order to meet General Pope. And then Lee's going to come and meet him with reinforcements. And this is another Confederate success. And after 2 months, Lee is pretty much pushed Union or Federal forces out of Virginia. This brings us to September of 1862. Lee decides that we need to move into Maryland. We need to put pressure on the capital of Washington, D.C. This could be our moment, right, to win the war. Unfortunately, a Union private finds Lee's battle orders wrapped around a bunch of cigars at the base of a tree. But then lucky for Lee, he's notified by his scouts. He has scouts that find this out within a day, so he's able to change his battle plans. But the Confederates are still greatly outnumbered. You only have 30,000 Confederates against 87,000 Yankees. And I know this can be confusing, the terminology, because Confederates and Yankees, and then we'll say rebels and Federal forces and Union, North, South. And at the end of the lecture, we'll kind of go through and I'll clarify all of that for you. So Yankees would be the Union as well, okay? That they're the same. So this battle will have one of the bloodiest days in American history. In fact, the bloodiest day. 24,000 men dead in one day, September 17th, 1862. Please take special note of that day and remember. And here's a picture from it. You can actually get this picture colorized if you look for it online. And it's, I mean, when you look at it colorized, it takes on just a more gory aspect, a more realistic aspect. So anyway, technically, this battle at Antietam is a Union victory, but really it's a draw. Nobody pursues the other side. We kind of just decide we've had enough bloodshed for the day. Lincoln uses this, though, as a victory and as a place to come from a point of strength so that he can issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So this Union victory at Antietam is essential to Lincoln's issue of the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, December 1862, Lincoln will now replace McClellan. He gets rid of McClellan, and he replaces him with General Burnside. He is where we get the term sideburns from, and here you have a picture of him, you can see. General Burnside will fail against the Confederates at Fredericksburg, so Fredericksburg will be a Confederate victory, and so then he is replaced by General Fighting Joe Hooker. So, like I told you at the beginning of this lecture, you have a lot of replacements within the Union Army. Okay, we get to Chancellorsville in May of 1863. And Hooker kind of arrogantly has this quote that, "May God have mercy on General Lee, for I will have none." And Lee goes ahead and he defeats Hooker with less than half the men. Unfortunately, though, Stonewall Jackson is wounded and he dies during this battle. You need to know these 3 reasons why these Southern victories are important. So this whole kind of war in the East is really leaning towards the Confederacy. And 1, this is significant because it frustrates the Union war aim of capturing Richmond. They can't capture Richmond. 2, it raises the morale of the South and it lowers the morale of the North. So it's going to give motivation to the South to keep fighting. And 3, the longer the South is fighting, the more likely it's going to be that a European power, specifically England, is going to recognize them as their own independent country and come and support them. Okay, now we're at Gettysburg, July 1863. Lee feels like This is the time. We need a victory on northern soil, and if we can get this victory, it might end the war. Because remember that northern morale is very low. So you have two advance parties meeting near Gettysburg in the early days of July. On July 1st, federal forces are driven back onto high ground, and federal forces would be the same as if we said Union or the North. That's all the same, or Yankee. So those would all be terms that would be blue. In your mind, make those blue. July 3rd, we have Pickett's Charge, which is this kind of last-ditch effort by the Confederates. The rebels attack at the center of the Union position along Cemetery Ridge, but they're quickly overwhelmed. There's 50,000 casualties, and the South is just pretty much, this is it. They are never going to be able to launch another offensive. They're going to be on the defensive for the rest of the war, pretty much just running and trying to survive. And the North, after Gettysburg, is too exhausted to follow them to end the war right there. So the war will continue after Gettysburg, but it won't be as successful for the South. This is the battle where, after the fact, Lincoln will come and make the famous Gettysburg Address to dedicate the cemetery there in November of 1863. Here are your paragraph shrink words. Misconceptions defeat victory. Your bonus question answer will have something to do with General Burnside. Here are your SRQ questions. Why did the Confederates not follow up their victory at the First Battle of Manassas? They were too disorganized. How did the First Battle of Manassas affect northern and southern morale? Okay, the North pretty much demoralized. The South felt relieved and confident. What is the significance of the clash between the Monitor and the Merrimac? It was the first battle between iron ships. What event marred for the Confederates their victory at Chancellorsville? That would be that Stonewall Jackson was wounded by his own men by mistake and ends up dying. In what three ways were the Confederate victories in the East important to the Southern cause? There you have a little typo there. Sorry about that. 1, it prevented Union from capturing Richmond. 2, it raised Southern morale and lowered Northern morale. And 3, it increased the chance of Britain joining the war effort. Don't forget to be reading Red Badge of Courage. You need to be up through chapter 8 by the end of this week. The discussion questions are all up on course site, so make sure that you're taking care of those as you go through the text.